You know, every civilization believes it will last forever. Every empire carves its name into stone, fully expecting that eternity is guaranteed. But time, well, time keeps absolutely no promises. Welcome back to today's Explainer. We're going to open the archive on a true historical cold case. We're talking about a massive, incredibly advanced civilization that history almost completely forgot, the Indus Valley. But we aren't just looking at its rise or its glory days. No, we are going to look at its silent eclipse.
Time really is the ultimate test, and frankly, it's a test that every great power eventually fails. Hooking into that idea, what's truly fascinating here is that we're not going to investigate how these people conquered the world, but rather, how their world ended. We're going to dig into the soil, look at the artifacts, and trace the shifting patterns of human movement to solve a 4,000-year-old mystery.
Section 1. A civilization ahead of time. Okay, let's dive right in by rewinding the clock a bit. When we think of the ancient world, our minds almost automatically go straight to Egypt or Mesopotamia, right? But 4,000 years ago, while much of the world was still just figuring out how to build a straight wall, the people of the Indus Valley had already built true, sprawling, meticulously planned cities. We're talking about places like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dholavira, and Rakhigarhi. And the sheer, staggering scale of what we are dealing with here is just incredible. At its peak, the Indus Valley civilization stretched across nearly 1.5 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective for you, that is larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. And it was packed with life, home to nearly 5 million people. For roughly 700 years, this was arguably the most sophisticated urban culture on the entire planet.
And when I say sophisticated, I mean truly unprecedented urban marvels. These people built two-story homes using standardized fired bricks. And they were so standardized, in fact, that bricks found in cities hundreds of miles apart share the exact same dimensions. That is a massive logistical coordination that literally still stuns archaeologists today. They had indoor plumbing, they had citywide drainage systems, public baths, enormous granaries, and fully operational dockyards. But okay, here is the most incredible part of the whole shebang. 0 palaces have been found, no grand tombs, no monuments to kings. Whatever power structure ran this vast empire left absolutely no trace of tyranny. There are no weapons of mass warfare and no scenes of conquest carved into their walls.
Section 2. The Silent Collapse. So, for centuries, they thrived. They built, they traded, they lived in relative peace. And then, well, something broke. We really have to look at the inciting incident of our mystery here. This is the moment when the foundation of the most advanced urban culture on Earth began to crack. Around 2000 BCE, the first invisible dominoes fall when the life-giving monsoon patterns begin to shift. By 1900 BCE, archaeologists can actually read the cracks showing up in the soil and the artifacts. Those standardized weights and measures, which were the absolute hallmark of their unified civilization, they just start disappearing from the record. Craftsmanship drops off. That beautiful precision brickwork gives way to crude, sloppy construction. The streets literally fill with debris. And then, slowly, the great cities began to empty. It didn't happen overnight, though. It was more like air slowly leaving a room you didn't even notice until it was entirely gone. By 1700 BCE, within just 2 centuries, these massive urban centers were largely abandoned.
This brings us to a really chilling realization. Mohenjo-daro, a vibrant, bustling city that had once safely housed 40,000 people, was reduced to total silence, which forces us to ask the central question of our entire investigation today. Why? How does a society with this level of engineering and social harmony just stop?
Section 3. Debunking the invasion myth. Now, to answer why they fell, we first have to address a pretty massive historical false lead. For decades, investigators and historians chased a ghost. They looked for an enemy that simply didn't exist. See, for a long time, the leading theory was the so-called Aryan Invasion Theory, this idea that nomadic peoples from Central Asia swept in and completely destroyed the Harappan cities by force. They based this entirely on skeletal remains found in Mohenjo-daro that showed blunt force trauma, basically painting this vivid cinematic picture of a brutal massacre. But modern archaeological analysis, it proved that picture totally incomplete. It turns out those skeletons actually dated to entirely different time periods. The violence was real, yes, for sure, but it was completely isolated. It was absolutely not the signature of a civilization-ending conquest.
It's often said that history rarely has one villain. Because the invasion model didn't hold up to scrutiny, modern researchers had to completely move away from the idea of a conquering army and look elsewhere for the culprit.
And what they actually found is a much more complex, multifaceted truth.
Section 4. When the water stopped.
So we have to look away from phantom armies and look at the real catalyst of the collapse, the environment. We have to look at the climate. And this is where the story gets incredibly compelling, and frankly, a bit unsettling in ways that feel uncomfortably modern for us today. Let's walk through this cascade of pressures step by step. Step 1. Around 2000 BCE, those reliable monsoon rains across South Asia began to weaken and shift. Step 2. Because of this, the rivers, which were the literal veins of the civilization, began to behave differently. The massive Ghaggar-Hakra River, which fed the most densely populated regions, simply began to dry up. Some researchers even think this might actually be the legendary Saraswati River from ancient texts that vanished. Step 3. Without predictable water, agriculture becomes a total gamble. Crops fail. And finally, Step 4. When agriculture fails, cities cannot be fed. Without food, the massive trade networks and urban administrations simply dissolve.
But climate alone? That was just the first domino. Look at how the crisis compounds here. We see the internal fragmentation of their economic systems. We see the gradual breakdown of those sprawling trade networks that basically held everything together. And then, the skeletal evidence shows something genuinely terrifying: epidemic illnesses. A civilization that is already weakened, already stressed by drought, and starving from failing crops, is suddenly hit by disease outbreaks it has absolutely no way to contain. When the economic glue dissolves and disease hits a starving population, well, cities don't need to be conquered by an invading army. They just stop working.
Section 5. Survival through transformation. So what happened to the millions of people? This is the real twist in our investigation today. Because unlike so many other fallen civilizations, there was no dramatic last stand here. There was no sudden Pompeii moment or final glorious battle recorded in stone. And this brilliantly illustrates something deeply remarkable about who the Harappans actually were. They were pragmatists. When the massive urban centers could no longer sustain them, they didn't just sit there and perish. They adapted. The cities fell, but the people did not. They dispersed. They moved eastward, away from the dying rivers, and spread into the Gangetic plains. They broke down into smaller, much more sustainable agricultural communities. But they didn't arrive empty-handed, not at all. They carried their deep, generations-long knowledge of farming, of specialized craft, and of culture right along with them. They didn't vanish into the sands of time. They transformed.
And we know this for a fact today. Modern South Asian populations carry clear genetic continuity with the ancient Harappans. Think about what you should really take away from this. 1 billion people today still carry the thread of those ancient brick-lined streets right inside their cells. The bloodlines, the cultural practices, the roots of traditions that persist today, they are still here.
Section 6. The Undeciphered Mystery.
As we near the end of our explainer, we really have to bring the narrative back to the ruins of Mohenjo-daro for one final reflection. If you walk those ruins today in modern Pakistan, you are walking streets that were laid out 4 millennia ago. The brick walls literally still stand to shoulder height. The great baths hold their shape perfectly. But despite all of that physical presence, there's a lingering tragedy. Think about this archival silence. Egypt gave us hieroglyphics that we eventually decoded through the Rosetta Stone. Mesopotamia gave us cuneiform. We can hear their voices, we know their kings, we know their myths. But the Indus Valley left us perfect geometry, brilliant urban planning, and hundreds of inscriptions, a complete, distinct writing system that remains entirely undeciphered to this day. It is an extraordinarily organized civilization, and yet we cannot hear their voice.
And that leaves us with this final, truly haunting question. We know what they built. We know exactly how they engineered their world. We even know how that world fell apart. Not all at once, but gradually to a shifting climate and fraying trade. But will we ever know what they thought? Will we ever know what they called themselves or the songs they sang? The archive of history never fully closes, and the past is never as buried as we think it is. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the past.